in a good spot. So let's carry the momentum over. And Josh, I think you get the first take a little bit. Let's have Matt run the numbers, and then I'll run a very quick bio as well on the
So
group,
this is, if
courtesy of
I'm not
All Music.
mistaken, if I did my math correctly, this is the Mekons
Hmm.
with and I think I'm saying that correctly. The Mekons Rock and Roll, their album from 1989, comes in at number 994 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 97 in 1989, number 6,533 of all time. It's the Mekons' second highest rated album, behind 1985's Fear and Whiskey. Um, this album, as well as the rest of the albums that we're covering tonight, none of them made Rolling Stone's list. And the Mekons are ranked number 1,699 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Yep. So I wanted to get when we were doing the original show run, I wanted to get the Mekons in because they're mentioned a lot. They have like hundreds of albums and complete. They're one of those bands that just has tons of stuff. So I kind of wanted to bring them in, and I think what we're gonna do this week, because a lot of these bands are deeper cuts, is do a very quick summary of the band. And as I often do when we cheat a little bit to do it instead of digging from a lot of sources, I'm gonna kind of take all music a little bit to narrow it down. And one of the first things that is there, the quote in the initial biography of the Mekons, is from our good friend, and I would argue maybe a CTS Fringe Hall of Famer, Lester Bangs. Would we say he's a Fringe CTS Hall of Famer, guys? Does he
Yeah,
get there or not so much?
probably.
Okay.
I haven't, we
What?
haven't talked.
Our
We haven't talked
reviews are
about.
reminiscent of Lester Banks.
We haven't talked about him in a while, but yeah, I think he's a prominent critic. So sure.
So he, as is often the case with him, this quote was tongue in cheek, which seems to be par for the course for Mr. Bangs, where he said, "The Mekons are the most revolutionary group in the history of rock and roll." And the reason he said that is because they pretty much are one of those bands that every album they do is very, very different from the other album they do. So pretty much in listening to this, we cannot get a feel for what the rest of their albums are because they've done synthesizer pop. They did an album that was considered one of the earliest examples of alt country. They did old school rock and roll, folk, punk rock, noise rock on just albums in the late 70s and 80s alone, guys. So that's to give you an idea. They're also
I am counting 24 albums, studio albums
and
on
that's not even counting like compilations and stuff like that.
right.
So
It's just their
there's
studio albums in Wikipedia. Their most recent was in 2020.
yep.
Wow.
So yeah.
And they formed in Leeds, Yorkshire, England in 1976. They were all art students. Surprise, surprise. The original lineup, which is long, long gone by this point, is singers Andy Corrigan and Mark Chalky White, with guitarist Tom Greenhall and Kevin Lysett, bassist Roz Allen, and drummer John Langford. So they are always known for being very political. And as you might imagine, their politics lean to the left, as someone who started in the punk rock area would. One of their most famous songs early was a song called Never Been in a Riot, which was a sort of sarcastic aside to The Clash and White Riot, right? It was like an answer to that a little bit, with a little bit of a sardonic tone, shall we say. And then basically the story of the band is through the 80s, members coming and going, and doing a different sort of thematic sound theme, you know what I mean, on each of them, with that same idea of political lyrics and stuff like that along, and sort of they're just reinventing themselves, almost like I would say like an art project idea, you know what I mean, like here's our new project type of idea. And they almost sort of operate as a collective in some ways at different points. At one point, our friend Dick Taylor comes into the band, guys. Remember him from the Pretty Things and the Rolling Stones? He, in 1985's album Fear and Whiskey, is in this band on the guitar before ducking out. So by the time they've made this album, they've made a ton of different albums that have grown them a very hardcore to this day fan base. And they have also signed a major record deal at this point. Actually, it's an independent record at this point on a U.S. independent label. Twin Tone is where they move to. And then finally, this album, I should say, is the one where they get the major record deal with A&M Records. So this is their first major label deal. Mekon's Rock and Roll from 1989. And the idea on this album was that they were going to do their sound, but as it says here, dial up the guitars while keeping the fiddle and the accordion as part of it. So this is considered to be the most accessible Mekon's album. It actually has two videos that were made for it that actually got a little bit of MTV play. Memphis, Egypt, and Empire for the Senseless are those. And this would be the last album for our friend Dick Taylor. He of the Pretty Things and the Rolling Stones. He would leave after this. And as you might imagine, for a group that was this committed to sort of leftist politics and also sort of the collective, the coming from the art world, they last all of about 2 albums on A&M before it ends badly with them. So they were kind of getting record notes from the band, and they did exactly what you would imagine, kind of the Neil Young thing, where they took the record notes from the album and proceeded to give them the format of the album they want, but with a sound that was the exact opposite they want. The album was described as a dour version of their now trademark sound with ghostly vocal samples and electronic rhythms. And it says the EP puzzled their record label, who passed on their next album, which I found, but it's like, yeah, no, you can skip this one. We'll do the next one. So that's a little bit there. I just wanted to give a little bit of a background so you guys had it. I won't go too long. Josh, what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I didn't know this band, and I was kind of into them upon the first listen of this, and I guess the short way I would summarize this band is like a really good bar band. That's kind of the feel I got from them. This, I definitely noticed the violin and the accordion on this, and they throw some harmonica in at different times, and they've got this kind of like foundational, like fun rock sound to it, but also kind of this British like folk, or I don't know if it's trad as Matt has referenced before, but it's kind of got this like British like folk feel to it at times with the violin and the accordion mixed in. It really reminded me of like the Hold Steady in terms of like their rock sound, or maybe like Flogging Molly in terms of like they're using the instrumentation of more traditional like British type of feel to it. They do kind of like do different things throughout the album in terms of I should note they have a female lead singer that takes over, kind of alternates tracks at times, or kind of every 2 tracks or something she comes in and sings the song. They have some what I feel like kind of like psychedelic elements to their sound on a song like Ring of Roses, or Learning to Live on Your Own. I felt like they seem to be drawing from a lot of different influences, as all bands do, but maybe kind of more blatantly. Cocaine Lil reminded me of like a Velvet Underground song, but not as good. And that's kind of like the overall impression I got of the band, is they're pretty good, but like not as good as other bands. And while it was an enjoyable listen, and I do kind of pick up on the other, their ability to maybe to go into other genres. Only Darkness Has the Power's slightly country sound to it, but I feel like there's something, they're like a really kind of like above average band, but nothing, at least on this album, that made it rise in my estimation as like a hidden gem or something that would take it to the next level for me. They just seem really solid, but nothing that like knocked my socks off. So I enjoyed it, but it wasn't mind blowing. I wonder what you guys think about that.
Matt, you got the second take?
Mm-hmm. So I'm higher on this than you are, Josh. I really like this record. I didn't know anything about these guys. But from the beginning, just the opening track was just like, okay, I'm listening. With Memphis Egypt is the name of that song, and it's a great opening track. It's a
Yeah.
full, like a lot of the words that you used to describe this. I would agree, Josh. You took a lot of things off of my notes, but it's the other way I would describe it. There's a lot of songs that are just full sounding rock songs, so lots of like there's not a whole lot of space. It's just like full guitars playing like straight ahead rock songs that are upbeat, that are melodic, and that are energetic, right? Anthemic
Yeah.
even. There's some building that's happening here. Kind of songs that you could. Yes, I don't know if I would call them trad necessarily, but definitely songs that could be sung at a group sing along in an Irish pub or a British
Right.
pub somewhere. This kind of
Yeah.
anthemic, we're all in this together kind of camaraderie type vibe that you're getting from a lot of the songs here. There's 14 tracks I think on this, and
Yep, 14.
it's definitely a rock album. But one of the things I liked, it switches styles a good amount. Like there's definitely some psychedelia on here. There's songs that are slower paced. You're right, that Cocaine Lil song sounds like a direct ripoff of the Velvet Underground.
Yeah.
And I thought it was great. I don't think it was like subpar. I thought it was kind of a cool little deviation that they threw in there. And there's waltzes in here where they slow it down and they do this kind of waltz kind of thing. The tone of the fiddle changes. There's times where it's a little bit more clear, and there's other times where it's a little bit more abrasive. I love the incorporation of the accordion, of like the tom drums, the female vocalist, who at times I thought sounded like Natalie Merchant, actually, especially in the first song that she sang. I'm like, there's a little Natalie Merchant vibe going there, and I really liked her voice too. So I think that's one of my biggest compliments to this record, is I just love how it just shifts vibes and sounds from one song to the next, but it still stays within that lane of like that rock. It's punk too. There's definitely a punk aesthetic going on here as well. And so that variety with the catchiness and the anthemic nature of a lot of what's happening here, it's a really interesting record, and it definitely kept me going throughout. 14 songs is long. I think it's close to like 50 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in
Yeah.
that vein. But yeah, overall, it's I really enjoyed it. So yeah, it gets a fairly big thumbs up from me.
Yeah, I was surprised by how much I like this one, guys, because I'm not normally like pub rock, Irish folk element, like British Isles folk element type of music. But I think what really redeemed it for me was something that Matt said, the eclectic nature of the sound. And I think that probably is something that comes about from the fact that they were stretching their wings throughout the 80s and even the late 70s. You definitely could tell they started as a punk band too, because lyrically, and I can't really describe it, it was there was an edge to this music that normally this type of music doesn't have to it. And that might have been the special sauce for me, that extra edge. There were a couple songs I really liked on this album. I liked Only Darkness Has the Power and Empire of the Senseless. I'd say half of the songs were really good guitar songs, like just driven by guitar and just what I would consider to be tasty guitar lines. And then like the other half were songs where the guitar was there, but was definitely not in the front of the songs. And it actually worked in some ways, because I waited for the guitar songs, and in first listen, I was really connecting with those. But the second time around, knowing the structure of the album, I didn't necessarily wait to see when the guitar came back in. I rode the wave a little bit more and appreciated like when they were doing it and when they weren't. The multiple singers is something that I tend to like in groups quite a bit to begin with. It almost feels like you're listening to multiple different bands. And so when an album runs, say, 50 minutes, I think when it's one singer or one style, it can get a little bit long. But for some reason, when there's multiple singers, it doesn't feel as long to me, because you feel like you're getting a lot of different approaches. And I think that's really my takeaway from this album was it took a genre and a style that I don't always love, which I would say on this album, the two most prevalent lanes are sort of folk and pub rock, and I'd even say a
Yeah.
little bit of like guitar rock, like indie guitar rock, on this too, because there's definitely in isolation, if you listen to it, some of these guitar lines are similar to things we'd be hearing in the 90s and 00s in different genres as well, and certainly in the 80s as well, like post-punky guitar lines and guitar parts, as well. You guys mentioned the psychedelia. The psychedelia is not all over this album, but there's a couple tracks that specifically sound
Yeah.
of psychedelia. Was it Ring of Roses? Was that was one of them, and a couple. So, and that really was it for me. I think that's what I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I just think that they kept me on my toes enough that both listens, I was engaged, which is always the sign of at least a thumbs in the middle or a slight thumbs up for me. And I would give this slightly between full thumbs up and slight thumbs up. So like 3/4 of the way thumbs up on this one, because I definitely enjoyed it more than I think I thought I would if you just gave me like a synopsis of what the band would sound like. And it's a nice little reminder to me that even though I have preferred styles, there are folks within almost every type of music that I can find representative that I like in it. And that's been a cool thing on this podcast, is that there's almost no completely shut down lanes for me.
Yeah.
And I would, sorry, I would agree with you. I think this would be a fun band to see live. Like, there's a lot of songs that we're playing on here that I was like, man, that would be a cool song. Now, I guess they don't all sound like that because, with as you were saying in the bio, how eclectic they are and whatever. So it'd be interesting to hear some of the other stuff. But if they just did this album front to back, I bet you that would be a blast to see live.
I also think they're an interesting band, and that it would be fun to see them if you knew all their songs and to sing along with it. But I think you could just as easily know none of their songs, like we came into this week and do it. And because they have such a wide array of material, I think it would be a really interesting listen just to kind of have them unfurl all their different styles at you, because they did a lot of styles on just this album alone. And when you read their history, like they're doing all country albums, electronic albums, avant-garde, noise rock, punk, straight ahead punk rock. So when you figure they can go into all of those lanes as well, it really makes it it would make an interesting show for sure.
Yeah, I think this band would, for me at least, benefit from seeing live. But I think, I don't know, there's just some element missing for me. I'm definitely not negative on the band. It's a solid like thumbs in the middle for me. I just feel like, I don't know, the lyrical content was not there, and while the music and guitars were good, and I enjoyed kind of the harmonica and violin, it just didn't rise up enough to separate it from other bands.
Mm-hmm. Like, I like this better than a band like the Pogues, who we covered, right? Like, I think this is a higher level of that style.
I would agree with that.
That the Rum Sodomy and the Lash went for. This gave me more looks for it. So that's the band I thought of immediately, stylistically. So.
Yeah, definitely close for this album.
Just the bird singing in the background.
That's it.